The final session is on evolving computational tools. Julia Chauvet is introducing the session for us. Thank you.
All right. So first we have Guiomar Niso, who is the head of the neuroimaging group at the Cajal Institute in Madrid. And yeah, apart from her neuroimaging work, she's worked a lot on open data repositories, open standard and open software. And from open software, she's going to tell us about Brainlife today. So, Guiomar.
Thank you for the invitation and for the organization of such a really, really nice event. And today, as Julia was saying, I'm going to talk about cloud computing for MEG and EEG data using Brainlife platform. So Brainlife is a platform for open cloud platform for neuroscience analysis. And I'm going to show you a brief schema of how is it organized. In Brainlife, you can have your datasets either imported from open databases or your own datasets, and they will go into a project inside an archive. And from this archive, you can just select the apps you want to run in the cloud, and this will use some resources to make the computations. And then you could have some results that you can pipeline through many subjects, and finally extract some features, do some group analysis in a GitHub notebook, and finally publish the results in a somehow similar way of a publication in a similar way you would do on a journal. So let's go block by block. The dataset you can upload can be uploaded from user interface or client through Brainlife platform. They have a place for that. Also, you can search Open Neuro and upload them through this. So you don't, if you want to analyze a data set that is already available in Open Neuro, you don't have to make so many copies because it's there. You just say import, and it's a link to the database is done in your project. And finally, you can do it also through EasyBits. EasyBits is a bits converter that works online in the cloud and can send you directly the data you have uploaded directly into the Brainlife platform. So EasyBits was thought to be a converter through an easy to use converter user interface on the cloud. And it was first developed for MRI, but now there are some developments that are also trying to include MEG data and intracranial. So when you have to run the apps for making your analysis, apps are just small programs to analyze the data that can be run individually or as a specific step into a large workflow. So you can run a concatenation of apps or just a big full app to run your analysis in the platform. These apps are shared on GitHub, so the code is open, and they are executed in a container and version control. And each of the apps has a persistent identifier, a VOI. So there are two technologies for Docker for making containers, like Docker and Singularity, and these are just making like packages of your code and all the dependencies the code needs. So the app always runs in the same way, no matter if it's Windows, Mac, Linux, MATLAB. You put everything you need inside this package. And so these apps are open and reproducible, and you can make automatic pipelines in a very reproducible way. So these apps will need some resources to run, and these run using cloud system on high performance computers, and Brainlife was designed to be decentralized in a way, so everyone can register a new resource of their institutions and use it for their computations. There are also public resources available that Brainlife offers, and private resources that, for example, if I register my institution cloud computing or server, then it will be only available for people working at institution or the collaborators I have. So also Brainlife tracks the success rate of the apps and the time that it takes to compute them, so you can efficiently follow the progress of your resource. So we are developing a full set of MEG and EEG apps to run in Brainlife. Now, currently, Brainlife was firstly designed for MRI analysis, but now with the inclusion of all these apps, it will support EEG and MEG analysis. And these apps are used uh, are are created using MNE Python libraries. So these are not released yet, but stay tuned because in the coming months we will release all these apps that are made for filtering, for doing SSP, ICA, epoch your data, doing epoch response analysis, and maybe some source reconstruction. So we are really working to make this happen. Well, this is a short video that will show you how Brainlife is. Well, it's too fast, but you create a project, and in your project you can make it public or private. Then you can find a dataset. This is the Omega dataset from OpenNeuro. So I will import the anatomical and MEG data that there. There are only 6 subjects because this is only a demo in OpenNeuro. Then you can create a pipeline analysis, and then you can start submitting apps for the analysis of your data. Brainlife allows you some control over the permission control. So there are administrators of the project or collaborators, and each of them has some rights. And when you run an app, it has some parameters, like if you want to do a PSD, then you will have the minimal frequency or max frequency and all these parameters. Sometimes the more technical parameters are hidden. So, well, you can are under advanced options, but so no one has to. Yeah, you see here the parameters. Some are visible at front, and some others you have to click a button, so it's easier to use. And then you will have the outputs, which are just figures. And also very important, Brainlife tracks the provenance of each of the files. So whenever you compute a file, you will know every of the steps you used, you did, and even you can span where it was run, how it was run, what was the file, what was the code, the version, and everything. So at the end, you can see the publication where you have all the data, all the pre-processing apps you have used, and then the GitHub a notebook, the Jupyter book that allows you to create the figures. So in that way, everything you create for a paper is reproducible because you have the data, you have your DOIs for all the data. Oh, sorry. So at the end, just summarizing how Brainlife works, as we were saying, you have the data sets that you can import through different ways. Then you will have your archive and the apps. And again, this is the same, but after watching the video, sometimes it's difficult to organize all your thoughts in. The first time to see it, that's why I'm repeating this slide. But once you have get your results, you do some feature structure, you work on a Jupyter notebook, and at the end you have everything linked into a single publication. So in case you want to reproduce a figure on a paper, you have everything you need for the figure to be reproduced just in a matter of a click, because everything is there and this version, and everything has a DOI and is uniquely identified and openly available. So these are the kind of examples you can easily do. This is for our paper that we just published about this is an example of the right hippocampus volume. You can just gather the information from many open databases like the Kanban, HCP, and PING databases, and then you can see and study the evolution of volume right hippocampus through age. We did the same for different metrics for MRI with volume, fractional anisotropy, with diffusion imaging. And here on the last figure, we tried to just create just very proof of concept, the alpha peak across age for the CAN-CAN database. And we see how it diminishes. This we can always improve the methods, but at least the proof of concept is there, and it's working really really nicely. And not only you can do analysis for gathering many subjects, but it's also important that there are other options that you can do with these types of platforms. For example, if you go into a single subject, you can see, let's focus here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but if you go to panel D, you can see how from your PSD, there are some sensors that are just above the knee. So these are bad sensors, and this can be automatically detected and discarded. If you draw a distribution of the sensors, you will see some outliers. You can do it manually, but you can also try to take advantage of this technology to do some kind of this automatic pipe analysis. The same way as you do for the sensors, you can also do it for the subjects, because if you have a population of many subjects, then you can see if there's an outlier. This can be an outlier because it's a noisy participant, or because there's a participant having some disease or some problem. So this kind of platform offer really amazing new possibilities. And we are working we are the MEG team of Brainlife, Franco, Aina, Natalie, Max, Cami, and me. And we are really working into developing this MEG app and EEG apps since a couple of years ago, or 3 years already. And stay tuned, because we will soon release them. But if you want to join us and volunteer your time for this project, because you are as passionate as we are, just write me or scan this code, and you can just be in contact with me and or Max and whoever. And especially if you know how MNE Python, or have some experience with MNE Python analysis, or also if you have with Brainstorm, Filtrip, AGLR, or any other software, because at the end we aim that everything could be inside the same platform. So the pipelines could be reproducible not only with one software, but also with other softwares. We started with MNE because Python is quite straightforward, and the way MNE is based on libraries and not user interfaces, quite it was easier for us to start. So I want to make some thoughts that I ask myself when I'm working in these kind of projects. Well, and maybe make you think also. When you try to create this analysis, you can think of keeping some flexibility in the analysis workflows, whether you have a monolithic app where you have everything inside and no option to go around, versus more modular designs. We are trying now to keep a balance, tending more toward a bit modular design. It's really important to review intermediate steps. That's why whenever we run an app, we always provide a figure, a visual figure, the output, and also an HTML report. So everything could be reviewed afterward. And if there was some error, then you can relaunch or rerun this participant. What I was saying before, we have to think about how we can make interconnectivity between toolboxes. Some toolboxes use some time of filtering or some time of analysis, and others other. And then it would be nice to be able to interchange data. But for this, we need to standardize results using like bits derivatives and bits provenance. It's really important. And this, I think, when these initiatives are a bit more consolidated, this would make us much easier to make this interconnection between toolboxes. And for cloud services, especially for the ones working in Europe, we have to be aware of the compliance with GDPR. And also a more philosophical or more question is, does the quality of research results improve using this kind of automatic tools? Or maybe well, I can give you my opinion, or maybe later in the round table. But for me, the base level of quality increases, but of course, the cutting edge research maybe cannot do with these more automatic and standardized and workflows. You may need to be more like in the frontier of methods and be able to touch the data a bit more and to play with it a bit more. But and in general, I think it does improve the quality of research on average. But well, we can discuss this later. And also, yeah, how automation may limit our creativity to think about new ways of analyzing our data. And finally, the sustainability. Yeah, this is something that it's really important. And I think the panel yesterday that was really interesting and way. And yeah, especially, I don't know if I have some, sorry, time, but related to sustainability, just yesterday, there have been more than 10 people died with the floods and with awful images in Valencia and Aragon in Spain. So this is catastrophic, and this is not an this will be more and more frequent in the coming days. So I think we should really think about sustainability, because our climate change crisis is it's real, and yeah, it's been awful. So yeah, I sorry, I really want to thank you and all my team at the New Emerging Group at Instituto Cajal, the Spanish National Research Council, to the Young Academy of Spain, and to Indiana University, which was when I started developing all these tools back a few years back. And this is my contact. You can just write me for anything you need. And thanks for all the organizers for this awesome conference. Because on the first video on the first day you were choosing which event, and I wanted to say that for me it was the live MEG when everything started, and we really produced this nice paper about good scientific practice in MEG and in EEG research, progress and perspectives. And since then, it makes me reflect a lot. And since then, I have followed online all the events, thanks that they make this hybrid. It's really, really, I really appreciate it, because for moms like me with 2 kids, it's sometimes hard to travel. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Guiomar, for the nice talk. I think right now I have not received any questions from the online people, so maybe we could start with the people here.
Hey, thanks for the nice talk. I was wondering, there's another bits pipeline thing, M&E bits pipeline. Is
Yes.
there plans to make this interoperability happen, or?
Yes. In fact, we were in touch. Well, too much work for us, but we were in touch with Alex and with Richard, and they are doing amazing work with the M&E bits pipeline. And once it's ready, it would be easy to integrate this into Brainlife, because in Brainlife, just you do a wrapping of your app outside. So yeah, this is something that we are on our to-do list, that we are in touch. Yes, we've been in touch.
All right, thank you very much. There's another question online. So I will, it's from Robert Ostenveld, and it's about sustainability. So the question is, yesterday sustainability was discussed in a presentation, and it was mentioned that Google uses 100% green electricity and AWS only 50%. In which cloud platform is Brainlife running, and is electricity consumption something that you consider?
Yeah, this may need to go to Franco Pestilli, which is the person behind all these decisions. But I think they are on Amazon. That's why I was a bit shocked when I saw the presentation yesterday that it says that Amazon was only using 50%. I don't know if also uses Google. I don't know, Max, if you know it, but I don't really know these details.
No, I don't think so. But the computing resources are mostly based in universities. Indiana University, Texas University. We have one cluster at the ICM in Paris that can run on with Brainlife. And so these clusters are then on whatever energy there is locally at this university. I I would like to see the data on the 100% renewable electricity of Google. I need to see the reference, you know.
All right. Do we have time for another question? Yeah, we have time. Someone else from the public here?
I might have one.
Okay,
That's
please.
okay. Just maybe more a practical question. What are the next steps for example, like standardized input-outputs that would allow Brainlife to use the different softwares?
Yeah, for me, it's very important to continue working on bits derivatives, because bits, have some some standard some specifications for raw data and some common derivatives for the multiple imaging modalities, but specifically for MEG and EG, we are working with the bits derivatives of electrophysiological data. And I think that once this is ready, some softwares, some toolboxes, and together with Brainlife, will need to rethink how the data is reorganized and stored as an output, because now we are defining our own standards. But I think the most efficient way to go is to really implement bits derivative specifications. However, because standards are a consensus thing, they need the agreement of many people, and they tend to go slow. Sometimes you need the things now, and you have to invent your own way of storing your data. That's why we are following the way that each of the tools stores the data, their outputs. So for now, we are trying to follow many ways of organizing the data, and if we implement the field trip tool pipeline, then we will follow the pipelines. And once we have these standards for derivatives, then we will try to interconnect them.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
So I have not really a question, but a comment. So Stefan Applebaum mentions that the form associated with the QR code can only be viewed by users in your organization.
Sorry. Yeah, I will. Sorry, I will open it. I forgot to share, but I will do just right after.
Yeah.
I finish. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So, and the last question from Arnaud Delorme. Thank you for this great presentation, Guiomar. We have an old EEG lab app on Brainlife. We are trying to update, and last time we tried Brainlife, it was centered on individual data recording, every file processed separately, which is a limitation. Is that still the case? Can entire bits datasets be processed?
Yeah, well, it's a way of Brainlife design. It's true that it can be seen as a limitation, but they have two different things. You have your individual, for each participant, you can run the same pipeline. And at the end is when you merge all your subjects together. So you can pipeline throughout your subjects, but not inside one app. One app is for one subject, one file. And then you can create in another tab that you have a pipeline. You can just say, for the 60 subjects of this huge bits dataset, then you can run these. But apps should be designed for every specific subject individually. This is a Brainlife design. And yeah, I know that we tend to create apps that already do everything together into one place, but I think this is also a strength, because if a subject fails or give bad errors or bad data, it's easy to discard. If you keep these two separate, these two way of analyzing separate, then you only stick with the subjects that have good data, and then you do your group analysis. So yeah, it can be seen as a limitation, but I think that there was some design behind it, and I don't have the power to change that. But I think this was the reason why it was done like that. Yeah, and yeah, thank you, Arno, and we'll see your app with using EEGX. It would be very nice to have it.
Yeah, it's nice that we see also other toolboxes except for MNE showing interest. All right, shall we move to the next talk? Yeah, all right. So I would like to introduce to you Britta Westner. She's a researcher and a teaching fellow at the Donders Institute and the Radboud University Medical Center. She is a supporter of open source, and she's a core developer of MNE. And she's also part of the lovely CuttingEEGX organizing committee. So we would really like to thank you for that. Britta, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for this nice introduction. I'm very happy to be here. I'm aware that I'm the last official talk between your afternoon and your evening. And I bring bad news, so I don't know how popular I will be. The title of my talk is On the State of Open Source Software. Well, in electrophysiology, in neuroscience, but I think it's more applicable beyond that, cycling on the freeway. And I want to start with the team that is behind this talk. It's not only me. We also have a paper forthcoming that is currently under review. The core team of this paper is me together with Daniel McCloy and Eric Larsson. But as you can see on the screen, there's many more people who contributed to this. For example, Vladimir is here in this room. I know that Jan Matthijs, Robert, and Arno seem to be watching somewhere. So that's just to let you know that this is by no means my effort alone. And also maybe important for you to know is that the author team of this paper spans 4 toolboxes. That's MNE Python, Fieldtrip, EEG Lab, and SPM. And we kind of speak together on this matter. If you can't wait for the paper to be published, there's also a previous version of this paper online on arXiv. If you are doing any data analysis in electrophysiology, you are most likely using an open source toolbox. And I regret to inform you that the existing ecosystem of neuroscience open source software is brittle. And we need urgent and profound action to change that. Well, how bad is it? So one way to look at this is to compute the so-called truck factor that you might also know as the bus factor. What this number describes is how many people have to be hit by a bus or a truck for a toolbox to basically stop existing. So it's a way to compute how many people in an open source ecosystem have enough knowledge to keep a toolbox alive. We take the example of MNE Python, of which I am a core developer and a steering council member. We have many, many contributors. We have around 20 core developers, but only 3 people know enough about the whole breadth of the toolbox to keep it existing. So how bad is it if we look at that? Here are your 5 favorite open source electrophysiology and neuroscience toolboxes: Brainstorm, EEG Lab, Fieldtrip, MNE, Python, and SPM, for which I ran a truck factor analysis, and the truck factors for all of those toolboxes is between 1 and 3. So your data analysis is relying on 1 to 3 people. It's not as bad everywhere in open source. If we compare this to AstroPy, which is a very prominent toolbox in astronomy in physics, that has a truck factor of 6. So neuroscience is on the lower end of the truck factors in open source. You could also look at it this way. Comic by XKCD. It's on open source in general, but the same principle holds. All modern neuroscience infrastructure relies on this one person at the University of Washington that effortlessly, well, not effortlessly, but thanklessly keeps your analyses from not failing. So I really want to drive this home. All users of a software package in our field rely on the work of 1 to 3 people to keep everyone's analyses from failing. Now you might ask, well, how did we get there? That sounds like a really stupid system. Why is it like this? Well, as we have heard over and over the last few days, the academic incentive structure is kind of dumb, and it is inadequate for software development. Our favorite reason: first, publish or perish. If you spend your time maintaining a software toolbox, you spend your time maintaining a software toolbox and not publishing in Nature or Science. This led to this new idea of people, oh, let me publish a paper about my software. Great, right? Good idea. Yes and no. So that was a good idea when you are starting a software, right? I started contributing to M&E Python when the seminal paper of M&E was, I think, 5 years old, 6 years old. So that train had long left the station without me. But we need people to keep contributing to those toolboxes without having the merit of being on the seminal paper. So some people, so this discourages, as I just said, the maintenance, and it also incentivizes new projects. This cool code that I wrote, oh, let me just put that on GitHub, make it my own software package and publish about it. Great. But now we have a lot of small software packages who will become unmaintained because they probably also just have a truck factor of 1. And also coming with that is that a lot of people see software papers as less valuable than papers on real research, even though this real research relies on the software that is maintained by those 1 to 3 people that do that just out of their goodwill, really. With that comes also a lack of stable long-term funding, because if it is not attractive for your employer to help you maintain a toolbox, it's also not attractive for funding agencies to fund you to maintain your toolbox. Especially stable long-term funding is incredibly hard to come by. Usually, if we do get grants, it's for 1 year or 2 years, and after that the cycle repeats and we have to find new funding. It's also way easier to fund a new project than to fund the maintenance of an existing project. There is more. There is an even longer red tail to this. Up on the screen now are 2 ranges of numbers. One is 10 to 28%, and the other is a merely 1.1 to 5.4%, a really big difference. Some of you in the room might guess where the story is going. Yes, this is about gender imbalance. There is 10 to 28% of women in industry jobs doing computer science. In open source, it's, depending on the estimates, 5% or less. That has to do with the informalization of open source. You might say, oh, it's amazing, it's democratic, everybody can just contribute. Yes, but there is a cost of contributing, which usually is higher for minorities. The numbers I have just showed you are for gender. Of course, those numbers reproduce for any other demographic you might think of, where minorities are underrepresented in open source. What do I mean when I say the cost of contributing is higher for minorities? They usually have to make sure that their code is really, really amazing before they can contribute it. Because if there's just one mistake in there, it's the typical, for example, well, girls just can't code, right? So you have to be even better at your job to get a seat at this democratic meritocracy table of open source. There's also a few papers that I found that describe the horrible stereotyping, discrimination, and harassment minorities have to look at in the open source world. This is now outside of neuroscience. There are no neuroscience-specific papers on that. And there are also other barriers that hit minorities harder than the majority of white men who contribute to open source. For example, that your supervisor might think it's not a good idea for you. You might not have as much free time because you have care duties outside of your work, etc. Or you might have inadequate training because people might not have believed in you from the get-go. And of course, there's a lack of role models. There is not very many minorities in open source, also not in neuroscience. So if you are aspiring to become one of the open source maintainers, you might not believe in yourself because you don't see yourself out there. And as I already have mentioned on the last slide, there is this informalization of old boys networks that have their own way of working that you, if you are not part of it yet, might just not know about and then might be excluded from because you don't know all the intricacies that you should know in terms of communication, etc. And now, do we just keep cycling on the freeway? Is there any solutions to this? Well, I have some ideas. First of all, we need to fund and professionalize software development in open source and neuroscience, especially for the maintenance of open source projects. We do not need new open source projects, but we also need to maintain the ones that are out there. So for those of you who are writing grants, write software development into your grant. Allocate some full-time equivalent time of your grant to contribute to open source. For example, of one of your postdocs or PhD students. Institutions, try to hire research software engineers. That sounds like an easy fix. It's maybe not as easy as you think because unfortunately software engineers are way better paid outside of academia and have better career options, but it's a good thing to try. It's not enough though. It has been proposed as the solution to the open source crisis. I do not agree with that because we need the participation of scientists with domain knowledge as well. We cannot just outsource our open source development to research software engineers. And I think we need better training for students and PhD students so that they can already more easily get into the contribution side of things. Nowadays, we hopefully teach them how to code. We do not teach them how to contribute to larger software projects, which is something that I think we should change. So if you are the teaching coordinator of a teaching program at a university, take note of that and see if you can change it. One thing all of us can do is cite the software, not the paper. That is already best practice in a lot of other fields, for example, computer science. But for some reason, neuroscience believes that citing the seminal paper is the best way they can do. There is an alternative. You can cite the actual software version you have used. I'm showing the example of M&E Python here. We deposit every one of our versions to Zenodo, where it gets a DOI. And the authors of this version are all the people who have written code that shows up in that version. That way, you can easily give credit to every contributor of M&E Python as you have used it, as opposed to the few people who happened to be around when the project started. So please, let's make this best practice in neuroscience. That starts with you writing papers, but also with all reviewers and editors out there telling other people who write their papers to do exactly that. And a last thing that I think is very important, and let me remove this, whatever it is here. Software is an important contribution to science. Let's start treating it like this. It's not merely the development of one's own coding skills. It's one of the pillars our science relies on. So I want to advocate for an equal value of substantial contributions to open source as one or ideally several papers. Funding bodies, hiring and promotion committees have to take note of this and take action to actually do this. However, please be careful with metrics, because we have seen with the age index, it's a really bad idea. And removing existing barriers and actually valuing software as an important contribution to science can also increase diversity in the open source community, because it will become a more valued part of our everyday working, and people do not have to do it in their free time anymore. Of course, this doesn't mean that we should stop promoting diversity in open source as a standalone, but I think it can really help changing the diversity obstacles we are looking at right now. So with that, I want to stop with a plea and say, your open source ecosystem needs your help. You are all depending on a brittle structure. Thank you.
Thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask you, in the truck factor comparison with AstroPy, I wanted to know if do we have an idea why neuroscience would differ, and in what way to other fields?
I can only speculate about that. I haven't talked to any physicists about this, but I think generally physicists are trained earlier and maybe also better in coding. So for them, the barrier to become contributors or maintainers of software packages might be lower than for us. And also that I have no proof for, but what I've heard is that the funding situation isn't as bad as in neuroscience. Because I think people are a bit more aware that they rely on software than people in neuroscience.
Yeah, thank you for the very interesting talk. I have a very practical question. How do you register a software package on Zenodo, for example? Like,
you deposit it there, and what you deposit gets a DOI.
okay, and so you do it for every new version, or you just do it once?
So if you update your version there, that new version gets also a new link. Yeah.
Maybe the question from Daniela, who asks what you think of initiatives like eBrains.
I'm afraid I'm not familiar with where did it go? Oh, it left. Oh, eBrains. I'm not familiar with that. Someone in the audience who can fill me in?
It's a huge project supported by HBP, I think, Human Brain Project. And the aim, I believe, though I haven't tested it myself, is something similar to what Brainlife does, basically. Yeah, something of this kind. I cannot say more.
Okay.
With more money, says Sophie.
So, I mean, our software is open source for a reason, right? It's free for everybody to use, also in such contexts. If there is huge funding behind efforts like this, the thing I can do is call to those platforms or funders to think about whether they can give some money back. not in the terms of a payment, but just to support the underlying other efforts that are there. Yeah, generally, or to also deploy, for example, software engineering time from their team to feed back to the toolboxes that they are using, right? So that it's like becomes reciprocity. But I think generally it's also the case that if such platforms pick up certain softwares, that also promotes them. So that is also good, right? So that can help in other funding acquisition, etc. But generally, it's important to me to let people know that the funding of those toolboxes does not just exist. It's underfunded. Most work that goes into it is done in free time or in the time where other people write their papers. So it's not like most people get paid for doing this, which is a misconception I sometimes come across.
Thanks, Britta. Do you think is there something that speaks against like a crowdfunding model where you had like, I don't know, my next paper, I don't publish it in an open access journal, but in PCI, and I wired the €2,000 publishing fee to MNE? Is this possible, or is there anything that speaks against it, or would that help?
Yeah, so what speaks against it are mostly structural barriers that can be figured out. For that, you of course need to register yourself. You might have to pay taxes, etc. So that comes with an administrative burden that, as far as I know, no toolbox right now is perfectly set out to do. At least MNE Python is not. Usually, if we do get funding, it's acquired from people on the project and then goes through universities, as other funding does too, to pay or buy out certain man hours from people who are already there. But I think if something like that would exist, this would be able to be figured out, right? So in a way, if you say, well, let's shut down, I don't know, our SPSS licenses and instead wire that money to the R project, why not, right? So if more and more people would do that, it would become worth figuring out the administrative side of it.
We have the question from Robert, who asks, what role do you see for companies providing, maintaining, and supporting commercial software, where, for example, the software may be free, but the support is paid?
I mean, this is basically it's not quite the MATLAB case, because there you also pay for the software. I cannot think off the top of my head of an existing model like this, where you get the software, but you have to pay for the support. I'm not sure it would completely solve this, because in terms of the time that is spent across, at least within the MNE Python ecosystem, across developers on maintenance versus support, the maintenance is the way bigger side. So making sure, for example, if there's a new Python release, that everything still works, or if a dependency re-releases, that everything still works. And to fix that bug that someone reported takes way more time than the time that we spent having our bi-weekly office hours or giving training workshops. So I'm not sure it can completely solve the issue. It would be different if you were to pay for the software, but that might then come with proprietary models, and that I am personally speaking against. So.
Hi, Britta. Thanks for raising awareness to this. I fully agree that it's a problem. I was wondering for the credit assignment, whether you see any kind of best practices also for the contribution lists, right? Do people sort it by lines of code edited or new features entered? This is really muddy, and I can imagine that it might also be a challenge for people in the NVO, for example, to make sense of this, right? Yeah. They already allow you to cite software, but how do they interpret it without impact factors or any of those things that used to guide them?
Yeah, this is a problem we have tossed around a lot at M&E Python lately, because our contributor list is quite large. And as you say, it's very hard to find a good metric. If you use lines of code, well, if half of that is a comment, is that still a good, right? There is just no good metric. So we are trying to find more verbose models where we more describe what people have done, at least for our top contributors. So the ones that really should have the credit when they apply for positions or funding. So that is something that definitely needs thought. I don't have a good answer at the moment. It's something, as I said, that we do discuss. One thing that I think is important, I said funding and promotion committees should look at contributions. I think it's important that the burden of proving that you did X for that toolbox shouldn't completely lie on the developers. So we should not also burden them with now coming up with creative ways of describing what they did in a way that then makes it easy for the promotion committees to see if that is true. But maybe they also are in a position where they have to think about good ways of measuring software output in a not one value way, right? So not an H index for software, please, because that will go wrong. But they could also think about at university level or beyond that, how do we want to measure open source contributions moving forward to give more value to them? Why does the burden of that need to lie on the people who are already giving up their time to fix other people's code bases? But yeah, that's something we are tossing around at the moment to at least make it possible for our contributors to, for the time being, have a way to give like a certificate of their contributions. Because also another thing that I want to briefly mention in that context, there's also a lot of contributions that go beyond writing code, right? Acquiring funding, community management, holding office hours. That's all also time spent on the health of an open source ecosystem that cannot be attached with a number of, oh, you have written 3,000 lines of code in that module and a 5,000 lines of code in that module. So also that we want to find a way to give credit for.
All right, we have one more question from the public here, and then we're going to move on with the round table.
Hey, thank you for the great talk and for shedding light on this burden, to quote you. I have more like a general reflection about today's talk and all the issue which has been discussed today. I feel like it's more or less the same reason which is causing everything. And I feel like it's more like academia needs a reform at its core. And well, I don't know if there is not a world organization of researchers to make acts of everything and maybe change things in a more larger scale, because each issue is valuable and should change in some way. So I don't know if there is an organization which is going on or so on.
I agree with that. It in the end comes all down to publish or perish.
Yeah.
There are several organizations working on that. I am, for example, part of the Radboud Young Academy, where we talk about those issues a lot. And one of the, I think, like devil circles we are in is people at the beginning of their career cannot afford to break out of the system. And as soon as you are in a spot where you could afford it for yourself, you usually publish with trainees who cannot afford it. So a lot of the professors and just like younger PIs that I talk to about this say, well, I would love to do this, but I will not do this on the back of my PhD student, for example, and I do not publish alone. So when should I break out of the system without risking someone else's career? And this is something I think we need to find some smart way around it. And my very personal opinion is that this will start with the funding agencies and not so much like with collective action, exactly because of the circle of you would probably potentially harm the career of someone that you took on into your group. We have seen it with open access. When the EU demanded open access publications from their funding, this moved. If they would now start to demand diamond open access, it would move again. So that could be one shortcut through the system from my view. I'm sure there's also other opinions on that.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. I think we can move on with the roundtable. There's been a small shift in the USA with some funds targeted to software. So why is that starting to happen in the USA and not in Europe? And how can we also push that a bit more in Europe?
Good question. I'm not sure whether I have an answer to that. So indeed, in the US, there is several funding schemes now from the NIH, but also other funding agencies, also private ones like the Jen Zuckerberg Foundation, actually, that do fund open source software. Usually not long-term, again, 1 to 2 years for very specific projects within existing projects. So that is great. Why this is not happening in Europe, I do not know. It's puzzling to me. I know there are some smaller grants, for example, in France, who are similar to that. But I hope that this changes and that we really get also big grants. And with big, I don't mean a lot of money in a short time, but money over 5-10 years to really sustainably plan our open source landscape and to ensure that the toolboxes we all are using now will still be around in 5 or 10 years. Because realistically, imagine how many men and time, like man hours and time it would take to retrain yourself and your team in a different toolbox. It would be so much cheaper to just make sure they all stay around.
Thanks. Guiomar, do you have a comment on this?
I want to also thank Britta for your amazing talk. I really enjoyed it.
Sorry, so maybe how this question would relate to Brainlife. So is Brainlife an open source project? I think it is, in a way, like you can add things in GitHub so they can be accessible. Then how can you keep this project also alive? Because I guess you also need some grants or you need some people to work for you. Like, how is that working? Do you need the grants or this is not applying to your model?
Yeah, and I was thinking Brainlife also has a chat factor of 1 or 2. I think 2 maybe. And one of these 2 was left the project, and Brainlife was in a big problem because they want research engineers can earn a lot of more money in companies. So if they leave, the project is sustainable. And Brainlife has different grants to make some developments. For example, for the MEG and EEG, we have this collaborating, that Max is part of it, project USA CNRS grants, and this keeps you a couple of years, but then the project ends, and then you have to. Brainlife has the until now it has received many grants to work on different different dimensions of the project, but I think it's not enough to have someone really well paid enough so he can remain stable for a long time and extend it in time. It's always 2 years project. So
going from working alone on M&E to using larger platforms like Brainlife is quite a large shift in a way. So what does it change for us as researchers? Does it restrict us? Does it change the level of standard? Guiomar, you alluded to that a bit. Does it change our creativity maybe from the point of view of a user and a researcher? what do you think the changes from using larger platforms like this can introduce?
Yeah, as was mentioning during the talk, I think when you have more and this also goes in line of creating a standardized pipeline for analysis. I think these sometimes the students come to the lab, they spend very short time in the lab, and then they have to learn many things. So if they have a way of analyzing data that is kind of not automatic but is a bit standardized, they can do all this filtering, all this preprocessing almost easier, and spend the time more on the research questions they want to solve. So I think and these steps would be less prone to errors, as if they had to start coding their own start coding their own code or creating their own pipeline. So I think overall the baseline quality of data increases. However, for example, in Brainlife, we cannot include the full option, as many options as you have when you have the flexibility of your own code or of using the library, a specific library like MNE, Python, or which other you use in your own way, and having your code. Yeah, so standardization is has good parts and bad parts, and I think it's kind of similar to globalization. It's really bad because you lose the idiosyncrasy of each of the things, but at the end it makes some easier things more easier.
Yeah, I think it's also a continuum, right? Also with open source software, there are certain defaults that are set for you that you might never change. There's certain choices in how things are implemented. Like, you are also not completely free. You are more free if you write your own code from scratch, but you choose not to do that because that takes a long time, or you might not have the knowledge. And I see platforms like this to just be a bit further on this continuum, right? Even more choices might be made for you, but that can, as Guiomar said, also be freeing if you don't know that much yet, or you are in training, or you just need a reliable way to run an analysis now, and you don't want to spend too much time on thinking about which options you should choose. So I would extend Guiomar's answer even to the level below, which is the toolbox level, because it also applies there.
Yeah, relating to that, I'm actually wondering to what extent such initiatives as Brainlife wouldn't then increase the gap in agency or competency, and then so increase that more people would be even more dependent on maintenance, because now they have even less hands-on power or understanding of the tool. And if that's really a question I have, does it actually then go towards professionalization or valuing the work of maintenance in general, or on the other hand, does it make even less people able to play that role for the community? I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and I have actually the same question. So, Britta, would you like to start?
Sure. I don't think so, because not every one of us will become an open source contributor, and that's totally fine. I think the people who do have this urge to look at code, to play with code, etc., they might not be the people who use such platforms every day. And I hope Guiomar agrees, that's also okay, right? Not everybody needs to use those platforms. So in other words, the people who do feel like they do want to contribute, they will probably go to coding and then to looking at the source code of what they have just been using, starting to play around with that and finding an entry point into contributing to open source. Other people might not enjoy that or might not have the resources right now to learn that, be that time or training. And for them, such platforms are great, right? It reduces also the how do you say, the uncertainty of, did I make a mistake somewhere, if there's maybe less options for you to choose from. So I don't share such a fear that it would kind of remove even more people from a potential open source pipeline. I think what removes people from the open source pipeline right now is that they don't dare to do it because they have the feeling that it's bad for their career, which unfortunately right now might be true, because they will write less papers if they really deeply dive into that, or because other people tell them not to do it, or because the community they want to enter doesn't look like a community they can enter for them, or there might be other reasons where they feel not welcome or not safe to participate. I think those are the bigger barriers, and I don't worry about platforms that make code easier to use at all.
Guiomar, would you like to add something?
Britta always have such good answers, and yeah, I think I don't have much to add. I only can mention like an anecdote that in Brainlife 14 there has been much debate whether we make this platform locally available for installation or keep it only in the cloud. And I think Franco is resisting to keep the platform available to be installed locally because of maintenance, because then they have to take care of all this kind. Like when you have the cloud platform, then you only have a system and you have to ensure this system works. But when you make this local installation, you have more other problems that may arise specifically for each user. So, yeah, and this related to them. So, yeah, just to mention this.
Any more questions? Yeah, we have a question from public.
So for somebody who doesn't work on any of these platforms at all, how does one go about becoming an open source contributor? What would be the route into it for a PhD student or a postdoc or something?
I think there is different ways. I think the supervisor plays a big role. Doesn't mean that they have to be able to do that themselves, but to encourage or even bring it up, right? If you are a supervisor of a PhD student and you see they're really into coding, they really enjoy that a lot, just to float the idea with them. Have you ever thought of contributing back? I can speak for M&E Python that we have different ways to try to empower people to become contributors. We have bi-weekly office hours where you can not only ask questions about using M&E, but also if you want to contribute. And we have also, in the past, when we had funding for that, run yearly sprints for new developers where you could apply for, and we would spend online, to make it accessible, a week with you, teaching you the ins and outs of open source contributing. And then there are even bigger programs like that. That's how I got into open source. I did a Google Summer of Code, which is a 3-month project where you get funded by Google to contribute to open source, where you then get a mentor at this open source toolbox, and they will teach you over 3 months everything you need to know to finish the project that you applied for. In general, if anyone feels like I would love to contribute this code, but it looks a bit intimidating, the best thing you can do is to reach out to the people who are maintaining or contributing to the toolbox you have an eye on regularly. I can, of course, not speak for everybody, but my overall experience is that in our field, people are extremely welcoming and would love to teach you how to do that, to get more contributors on board.
Max, you had a question, no?
It was actually very related to this. I found it a bit cumbersome to submit a pull request on MNE Python. So basically, contributing a bit of code is done through what's called a pull request, right? You send a request to the developers to accept your code, and your code then goes through a bunch of steps, continuous integration, I think it's called, like doing tests that the rest of the code doesn't collapse, which of course seems very valuable and obligatory for such a huge project to sit on its legs for long. However, for a developer or like a contributor who just found a small bug, somewhere, it is sometimes I feel like, okay, I found this, I know why it's not working here. I don't have time to contribute that. How do you suggest going about this?
Yeah, so number of thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you find a bug in the toolbox and you're pretty sure it's a bug, it's not a user mistake, but a bug, the best thing you can do if you don't have the time or the knowledge to fix that yourself is to at least open an issue on GitHub to say, hey, I think I found a bug, it's here, so that we know about it, right? Because we might not know about it, never come across it. That way you make sure that we can at least look into it to fix it. If you feel like you want to contribute it yourself and you get stuck, and this is where I'm not happy with the process, but I also know why it is the way it is, we will probably not immediately offer you help if you don't hear from you. That is not because we don't want to help you, but because we also don't have the time to keep up with everything. And that is because we would love to have a funded community manager whose job it is to look at forum questions, but also pull requests and say, oh, this has been lying around for 2 weeks. Let me check in and see if this person might need help. Or maybe they forgot about it. We don't have the time for that. We don't have someone who is paid to do that at the moment. So the best thing you can do if you need help is, and I know that's sometimes scary on the internet, is to ask for it and say, hey, I got stuck here. And then at least at MNE Python, people will rush to help you with it. But if you don't say something, we might not be aware of it, which, and again, I want to bring this point home, is not because we don't want to, but we don't have the resources to do that. And we would love to have the resources to also take people more by the hand to learn them things. But all of that is mostly done in our free time.
Thank you.
If I may add something quickly, because I'm also now new to MNE Python, I think like there are some hierarchy, like you can start by the forum, where you can ask something freely, many people, there is a whole community, which is really nice. Then there is the office hours every 2 weeks. This is also nice, you can meet the contributors and maybe you can discuss a bit more and maybe see how much you can contribute, what are your strengths. And then, the next step would be making an issue or trying to get into a bit more of the coding and fixing things. It would be the last. But just something that I want to mention for myself, I feel like for students, open source is not taught at all, I would say. And in the end, I don't think it's that hard to contribute. It just takes, you just need to give a bit of confidence in a student. And I've seen people contributing and you might not expect because they're like new to that. And from my personal experience, like when I met my first PR pull request, it gave me so much happiness. And I think I would definitely recommend you to get that happiness yourself. So
Nice.
So keep on making pull requests. Though. Okay, we have maybe Guiomar, would you like to comment?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that MNE is like an example of a very really welcoming community. I remember just my first pull request was a typo, and I just make my little letter there and make a pull request, and it was accepted. And then it was like, wow, it was an amazing feeling, as you were saying. So yes, maybe you can try just for trying with very, very small things like typos or wordings that are not working, like they are not correct, and then you little by little get confidence and go more into the code and more complex things.
Yeah, and also documentation. So if you know a lot about a method, writing a tutorial or adding to a tutorial or changing a tutorial, that is also valuable contributions, right? It's unfortunately another thing where we kind of discriminate stupidly within open source and say, oh, but it's not real code. Well, it is. Like, a tutorial is very important, especially in our fields, because that is what is outward facing. People don't care about the source code, but they do care about the tutorials. So also that is very welcome and nice contributions.
Sophie?
Yeah, it was a quick question to the sort of this whole discussion. Do you have any tips on how to help people overcome their shyness? Because I experience this a lot, that I work with students and they find a bug, but they don't dare saying it. So I end up putting the issue. I really have to encourage them strongly. And I don't quite understand why this is like, people just try to say on the internet, this is wrong, or often they're not sure that it's wrong. It doesn't work, but they don't know why. So do you have any...
maybe this is the time to sit up here and be brave. When I started, I was terrified. I was so afraid of making mistakes and looking stupid in front of those people I looked up to, right? Like the Alex Gramford, for example. No mistakes in front of Alex. But also, like, he's a very nice guy. It's not on his plate, right? It's on my plate. I was afraid. He told me, okay, this looks good. Can you rebase? I didn't dare to ask, sorry, what is rebasing? I went and Googled it and taught it to myself, which is, I think, also one of the things I talked about, like the level of contribution. Like, I had the feeling I had to be perfect because I didn't see myself in that community, 1. 2, I was a PhD student, and 3, all those people were writing all those brilliant papers, and here was I trying to figure out how to rebase. I think that's why I share the story, maybe sharing such stories and making sure that people know that we all start there. Probably also an Alex Gramford, if he's not listening, started like that at some point, right? And thought like, oh, what will those other people think about me if I make a mistake now? We do try to encourage people to, if we work with them, to also share draft pull requests. So share them in draft mode, which has some technical implications, but also really puts that draft label on it, saying this does not have to be perfect, because we want to early on work with you and shape where this is going, instead of later having to tell you this is flawless, but unfortunately not usable for us. So there's also that part of it. And we encourage, therefore, to share code that is not working, share code that is maybe just pseudocode, right? I would solve it like this, and then some pseudocode that is not even real Python. So teaching people that this is what we prefer, actually, over polished, perfect code. And then maybe also encouraging people to reach out personally. So one perfect way that Konstantinos also mentioned, at least within the M&E Python ecosystem, is our office hours, where there is usually 2 to 3 or 4 developers present. And you can come and say, hey, I have this code. I'm thinking about contributing it, but I don't really know how, or and then you have met those people on the other side of the screen, on the other side of your pull request, that will comment on it in person. And hopefully you will find out that they are just kind of like you as well, right? They are not those scary people from the papers, but just approachable people who, of course, will tell you if there's a mistake in your pull request, but that's also kind of the point for you to learn too. But they will not be angry at you or think that you are stupid. So maybe that could be ways to lower that perceived barrier. I think that perceived barrier, however, will always be there because it is scary to share things on the internet. That's also why we are scared if we publish a paper, right? Probably most of us know this feeling of, oh, what if there's still a mistake in there that I haven't found? That will probably never fully go away, but I hope that this can lower the threshold a bit and make it a less scary thing. Thank you.